Welcome and thank you for joining our Sacred Self-Healing meeting today. Step 14, the Divine Child and Finding Your True Talent. Welcome, everybody. This is a wonderful opportunity here for some of you to see what we are doing. We have been very busy in our self-healing community here since the beginning of the year. So this is our first true step meeting here on this Sunday, 14th of January. And I want to welcome all of those of you who are new to the Sacred Self-Healing community. And also those of you who have received the access links and the invitation for this live webinar on accident. I was so tired last night that when I sent out the invitations that I send it out to everybody. So we have a big group here today, and I want to explain for everyone who's new or who is basically a guest here today that this is an open mic meeting. And if you don't know the webinar software that well, there's a function where you can control your own microphone. And so, you know, what I usually do is that I unmute everybody's microphone. I won't be doing this today simply because we have too many participants here in the room. So I would like to ask you to raise your hand. The reason for raising your hand is because the main purpose of this Sacred Self-Healing meeting is to do live sharings and discussions. But usually when people don't know the webinar software that well, we have too much background noise on the recording. So I would love to ask you to raise your hand. There's a signal there, a little icon, to indicate to me that you would like to speak. Okay? So let's do a real quick sound check here. Can you even hear me? So there's a chat function also, and you can also comment and ask questions. Woohoo! Yes, wonderful. Okay, I'm getting lots of comments now. So you can text me and ask questions and comment at any time here of this online meeting with this text function. So you can either text or speak. All right. So the objective of this, these regular webinar meetings that we have, and we have different kinds of meetings within the Sacred Self-Healing community. We have meetings where we discuss the current collective energies. We have workshops. We just had one yesterday where we work through a particular subject with an energy session, and then have a live webinar afterwards to discuss it. These step meetings, as today, are particularly aligned to the actual Sacred Self-Healing course, which consists of 24 steps and a meditation and workbook that comes with every step. And I want to quickly show you what this looks like here in this for step 14. I apologize for the switching slides here. So we will be talking about step 14, the divine inner child today. This is what the workbook looks like. And even if you are in the Sacred Self-Healing course, but you're not on step 14 already, this doesn't matter. So the steps are not really ordered in a linear fashion. They're ordered in how most people go through the different layers of their ego and sort of the most common things they encounter. And with step 14, we are in the middle of working through some of our core subjects or core issues that most people have. And some of these steps will resonate with people more than others. This one here happens to be quite an important step. So just so that you get an overview over how we work here within the Sacred Self-Healing community. So there's this workbook, and then there is a meditation in which we introduce an energy work technique and sort of transcendental learning, as we call this. And I've just listened to that meditation again, and I'm pretty spaced out right now. So I hope I can produce a sort of a coherent live webinar here. Anyway, every front page has a little summary of what the step does. The energy work introduced in this step is triune fusion, which has to do with the inner trinity of the divine masculine, feminine, and the divine child, which is a very sacred process. And then the actual sort of energy work that is trained is reclaiming, and it lists the active energy fields that are addressed with this meditation. And you can see here the keywords for this step are Trinity, inner child aspects, and inner child states. So there's also a secular part where we explain what that even is from a psychological point of view, and where there's a little deeper education for those who really want to work with those aspects. Inner child space and a fusion and soul integrity. So this is a pretty big step here, and not maybe as some of you assume. Just talking about like what some of our issues are with inner child aspects, but leading your energy into the resolution and the reconciliation aspect of that. So this step addresses or helps or shows how to address the deepest fears, how to improve inner connection, how to become aware of inner child wounds and the associated coping mechanisms. It also shows, how we can empower ourselves through creating an inner safe space, and I'll talk about this here in a little bit, and how we can realign ourselves into this place of courage to allow change in our life, because for most of us that's linked to the inner child. It helps, of course, with identifying those inner child states and these coping mechanisms, but also how it relates to our perception altogether. And for those of you who are familiar with inner child aspects and so forth, it gives a really nice perspective on how our shadow aspects, our hidden aspects, how they actually relate to our inner child aspects, and it helps us to reframe them. So if this is all like a different language for you right now because you've never heard anything about inner child, then just enjoy this discussion where we go into the deeper metaphysical aspects of that part of our consciousness and what is holding us back. So because of this accident, I created a slide show here for us so that we can put this into better perspective. But before we get started, there are some of you here, and I know, of course, I can see your names, and you guys are like really, really familiar with your own inner child aspects. You've been with the Sacred Self Healing community for years. Some of you are heart warriors, and those of you I will unmute so that you can actually help me connect, the practical part of that with this sort of theoretical part that I am introducing here. So please mute your microphones. Those of you who can identify themselves as heart warriors or as someone who is in the transCODES training program, I'm unmuting your guys' microphones. And everybody else, please raise your hand if you would like to speak. We have background noises here, so please unmute your mute your microphone so that this is not on. And we also get your breathing, by the way. So, all right, everyone, I'm almost done. So I wonder who would like to share, um, just like from your, haven't been within the Sacred Self Healing.
About us going, your health is more important.
Whoops.
And get dressed and drive up here.
Okay, this is not me, so I'm just muting. There you go.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
who of you would li like to share with the community here? You know, those of you who've been around for a while, um, what, like gaining a deeper understanding of your inner child, how this actually affected your journey and what this did for you in general. Who would like to share here willingly in text or in voice?
Hello, everyone. This is Sebastian. Hi,
Here
Jona.
we go. Okay, quick introduction for you. Sebastian is in the Sacred Self Healing course for, I don't know, probably a year,
Yeah,
right?
about a year.
You are a heart warrior and you're also in our transCODES training program. So this is kind of like sort of the the, um, the deepest somebody could get involved with our healing modalities here and working with us personally. So Sebastian is a frequent flyer, so to speak, and has learned how to share, these personal things in the course of being part of these programs. Hey, Sebastian.
Hi, Jona. It's been a pleasure to work with you for all the time, and I'm so grateful for being part of all those programs that you pointed out. My inner child aspects were all the way from the beginning till now. There are many different aspects of my inner child, and the discovery, the unveiling of different issues with my inner child were profound in my journey. I didn't realize at the beginning how many different aspects of myself are intertwined with inner child issues. And
What were the first areas of your life where you real? I mean, what was the progression? So where did you realize this in the practical that your inner child is actually kind of running your life?
well, was that moment in my life when I realized that all aspects of my personal life, all my interactions with people were directed by my inner child wounds. And it comes from my early childhood, and also it comes with my karmic baggage,
Mhm.
like from previous lives, and it it influenced all of those interactions pretty
Like with
much.
other people, like
Yeah,
relationships.
yeah, for intimate relationships, friendships, even regular interaction with people that I don't know. All of them had
Wow.
the inner child aspects in it. My whole way of looking at others was directed by my inner child issues.
Can I ask, Sebastian, what were some of these inner child wounds that you identified in the course of your journey? Like how they, which are those? I mean, they're different for each and every one of us, right?
Mhm.
So without going into too much detail, but what do you think is sort of the core inner child aspect that runs most of your interactions?
Sure. Um, my interactions with it started where I can really pinpoint it with my early memories of my childhood and my interactions with my father and my mother, my parents,
Mhm.
and also with some other members of my family. But mainly, it was the outlook on life, outlook on how I am supposed to be, that was projected by my parents on me, and it would come with um, like physical abuse that I have received from my father and some psychological abuse that I have received from my mother. And I couldn't really see that when I was that young boy at that time. I was just trying to escape from those situations,
Right.
and I built on that all of my coping mechanisms. And when I started to work with you, when I started my self-healing program, I realized that all those wounds that were created in that time, all those interactions with my parents, that they are actually showing up exactly the same way right now when I am a grown up. The only difference is that it comes more as a coping with the situations or trying to avoid certain situations for the same
Or
reasons that were when I was a child.
so yes, Julianne is commenting here. What it did to her, it made her please, like become a pleaser,
Mm-hmm.
and asked, like in interaction with others, to be submissive in a way, and always sort of basically sort of a neediness and asking for help. And inner child work allowed her to recognize those moments when she's actually acting like a child. That is something that needs, of course, a little bit of more explanation. We're going to go into this because acting like a child is considered to be more of a negative thing, but so we don't really see ourselves as infantile, right, as grown-ups. But like you said, if you look a little deeper, these things that some of these wounds are like abuse, for instance, be it verbal. This picture here is more gearing towards verbal abuse, but even physical abuse or emotional abuse, they can be very tricky for us to identify because we were forced, like you said, to cope with this in such an early stage that we often lose the connection with well, if I want to get by and if I don't want to get punished or whatever, then I have to be in a certain way. And if I do this long enough, I kind of lose contact with who I truly am, or who was I before, before all this trauma came into my life. And that, the not so obvious things that are not necessarily that we cannot necessarily pinpoint as like, yeah, I was abused or whatever. Those are the things that we encounter on our deeper journey here of consciousness, because when, like you said, when it comes to interaction, intimate relationships, or interactions with people altogether, we can find that we have like weird programs there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that run us, like more than we would like to admit to ourselves, right? Such as I'm making just a few examples, Sebastian. I was hoping that this was actually my question, such as attention seeking or pleasing
Mm-hmm.
or neediness or controlling too, or manipulating. Those can all be things, and most of them actually are coping programs from when we were little. And some of these developed in such an early stage, like infant stage, or like Sebastian here shared with us, even prenatal. If we have a good connection with some of the karmic stuff that we have, for most people would call this past life. I don't really like the word past life too much because it limits people into thinking
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of so sort of other persons that they've been. Oftentimes, it's not really like that. It's more like a carryover from. So it could actually be also a different dimension of existence. So there's a karmic purpose there, right at the beginning of when we incarnate, and that then runs basically the rest of our lives. And if we never go into our inner child, then we literally fail to understand what this purpose is, because these early experiences, including the traumas, the wounds, they very often allow us to see sort of that thread that goes through our entire life. And once we develop the courage to reconnect with that, a wonderful healing can take place. And Sebastian, since I have you here on the mic real quick,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things that you have found out on your own self-healing journey, how this can help, how this healing process for yourself, how that changed things in your life.
When I look back in the past, I was just reflecting while you were talking about those aspects, that many situations would end up that I would react to some situation that I was presented with, and afterwards I would have that thought like, well, it wasn't really me. I wanted to do this in a different way, and right now, working with those aspects, I am more playful, more open, and more real. Like in general, just more real, and feeling what are my true needs, feeling how it influence actually my all expression towards different people.
And you
And
just said something really, you said something really important, Sebastian. Sorry for interrupting.
Mhm.
You said something like, how you observed your interactions and how you so often realized that you reacted in a way that you didn't really want to react. That
Yeah.
wasn't really me. And also, of course, for many of us, if not all of us, this constant sort of critical inner voice, right? This constant inner critic that keeps churning because of that, that we see, we do something and then we either regret it or we beat ourselves up over it. And then we get into this sort of endless loop, of just feeling down because we never really feel understood. We never really feel that we can be real, or it can go as far as like feeling like a total victim of life, and never really getting to the place, of being able to manifest what we want, or, actually having fulfilling relationships with others. Yeah, so this is the sort of the magnitude of yes, Julie, and I'm getting all your comments, and this is wonderful. I wish you could talk into the microphone because you have so many insights. So there's so much that is affected, by an unhealed inner child, and that's why we talk so much about this now. Sebastian, I need to move on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you for sharing, and if there's anybody else, please,
Pleasure.
either raise your hand. Yes, here are they. I'm unmuting your microphone, or text. Ade, I got you live.
Yeah, hi.
Hey,
Can
Ade.
you hear
Good
me?
to have you
Yeah,
here.
hi.
Yes.
My inner child relates with isolation, abandonment,
Mm-hmm.
and control issues. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
in your self-healing journey, have you found out that there's a connection between the two?
yeah, of course. And how I'm dealing with it now, when I'm in transmission, I feel more my needs. So I know that relates with my inner child and the
Uh-huh.
karmic issues. And when I'm relating with people now, I kind of let them do it the way they want to do it, and I do my own. I live and let slave. I leave people to do their own thing and learn to do my own thing the way I'm happy to do it.
So you first discovered that you have like control things going,
Issues. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Issues. And then you discovered that underneath all that is, and this is what I'm hearing, what you're saying, underneath all that is a confusion about your own needs, you
yeah,
know?
exactly.
And underneath that is the fear of abandonment that came in,
Abandonment.
yeah. It's very similar to myself, and a very sort of textbook, almost textbook type of cascade, that we cannot really address with our minds, because a lot of the things, especially like in your case, Ade, how you shared this, when you realize that these things are so, I mean, they were like right there when you were born, right? I mean, anything you remember, right, has to do with that fear of abandonment or with the pain of being abandoned. Then this is the cue for you, to understand that these things are karmic, and that there isn't really anything that you can do about it. But what you can do is heal all the pain around it, and therefore not needing to apply all these control things, or as we would call them, shadow aspects, because that's really what all this is leading to, is understanding that most of our hidden and unconscious things, whether we like them or not, but that's sort of the psychological definition of shadow, that they are actually directly linked with our inner child, with our core fears here as inner children, that still sort of run the show. Cool. Thank you, Adi, for sharing that. That's a really cool example for like how you actually get to the inner child. First you see some things about yourself that you don't like, then you realize, oh, I don't even know who I am, and then you realize, oh, I don't even know what I need, and then you realize, oh, that's why, because I have been run by this program, to avoid the pain of abandonment in your case, all the way from the beginning, that I've never really had a chance to feel this out. What do I truly need? And so most of our shadow aspects, such as control issues, for instance, or there's many other things that can be called shadow, but it's really just the hidden stuff in us, the stuff that we more or less avoid to really deal with. That most of that is really just part of that pain that we have that we cannot really address. And so
And,
sorry,
and one
go
more
ahead.
thing, people believing that people don't know what you're going through, that
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're going through, nobody knows it. That you're the only one going through it, and that's part of it too.
Yeah, Ade, I'm interested how. So what you mean is like, when people are not familiar with, that kind of deep inner self-healing work, they don't quite relate to it. Are you talking about like loved ones?
Loved ones, people, like even when I
Yeah.
first started the transcode, I believe you don't know what I'm going through, the pain I'm going through, that
Yeah.
kind of ignorance.
Yes. And this ignorance is, of course, you're linking back in with the abandonment, right? Because now
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
going through a massive healing process. And in the process, of course, stuff comes forward, and that can be quite, I mean, if you think about these programs running your entire life, if you start the healing process, yeah, things, things is, things are going to come up, this, things are going to change, and yes, what you just called as ignorance really is linking directly into the fear too, you know. But just as we weren't really able to see this about ourselves, other people can't until they actually go through that process themselves, And
Mm.
so we have to be, compassionate about that, and understand and stay non-judgmental, because especially with inner child stuff, we have this blind spot ourselves until our perception opens up, and so we cannot really expect other people to be able to see that. It isn't until, it's just like with so many things in life, that we need to actually experience for ourselves. What is it like to be a parent? What is it like to lose a loved one? Stuff like that. It isn't until a person actually experiences this healing process themselves. However, they get there, this here at transCODES, we're just offering sort of a roadmap for people who are willing to do this, how you can approach that. You can also get there through, a severe crisis in your life. So a lot of people actually go, without knowing that this is an inner child healing that they're doing, through a massive healing when, like, say, their parents die, that there's a lot of healing potential in that, because they go into closure with certain things. All right, but yes, Ari, I understand what you're referring to, but it's really important that we stay open, even in faced with ignorance, because it's understandable. If it was so easy for everybody to understand, then nobody would have unresolved inner child issues, you know. So this is our blind spot here as humans.
This is Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hey, Brian.
I, hey, hi everyone. I know, touching upon what Audie just shared, I know that part when you're going through that and you have the realization that no one really knows that you're doing the work that you're doing on yourself, I found that at times I was going through a very, what seemed to be lonely periods. And, but out of that, abandonment issues started coming up for me for when I was a kid and everything. So, and also a lot of shadow aspects came up for me when I was a little kid, how they started developing and stuff. So, and the way I was brought up was to believe that all of your solutions to however you chose to handle things were out there somewhere, and they weren't within yourself. And so, I started to get glimpses how I was conditioned to believe that. And once I started to contextualize all of that, at this point, I'm talking like, 6 to 9 months into my journey or so. And I started doing a lot of the child integration transmissions on myself, like a couple of times a week there for a few months. And I really got a lot of stuff out, but it really helped contextualize how all of these things came about. And because I was able to do that, I was able to have more compassion for other people and their journeys. And what Audie said is that we have no business really to infringe on other people's journeys. And that realization came about too, but it's all been a gradual process, and I'm still uncovering stuff.
I mean, I hear, but there are parts in what you're saying, Brian. And by the way, thank you for sharing and for chiming in. That also have to do with the feeling of in being inadequate.
Yes.
Because most of us here are people who have been around sort of the spiritual corner, in whatever way, and very intellectual and have no problems with understanding those things mentally, intellectually. But then there's a part there, that, if you just read sort of the psychological literature, right, that says, oh, it's easy, here, this is how this works with your inner child and blah, 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 and you're like, yeah, sure, and then, you recognize all these moments in your life, these little moments where you simply can't access those solutions, as you said, right? The solutions are out there and you feel like an idiot, like being in this sort of being zoomed back into your inner child fears or your inner child anger or your inner child pain, right?
Well, it put me back into the loop wondering, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm doing something wrong.
And I think the core, what you were sharing here, Brian, and what I hear between the lines is when you talk about compassion, that it also helped you to connect with yourself in a more compassionate way, and to understand that these things are deeper than just what the mind can resolve. This is not something that can only be done with the mind. Now, let me ask you though, since you are a heart warrior also and you're a trance coach, Brian, in your self-healing journey, what was sort of the thing that besides what you shared with us here, like really continually and actively working on this, but what made the big difference for you?
Well, asking that, nothing. What made the big difference? Nothing specific pops up for me.
The answer is always the same, right? The answer. It's not like a quiz. It's like, what helped you to overcome this sort of mentalization of these things, and to actually.
Well, what helped me essentially was getting back in touch with my heart and looking at anything dealing from the perspective of my heart.
Yeah.
It was going within. And
what did you find? What did you find there when you reconnected?
I found it very empowering. I found I rediscovered my true self, And I also discovered that it wasn't a matter of acquiring anything or acquiring my heart or my true self. It always been there.
Yeah.
It's
And
just
that it's not a
we've
matter of
always
like qualification, right?
no, you don't have to pass a quiz or anything like that. It's or go to a formal school necessarily or anything like that. It's you know it's going within, and it's not externalizing your power and giving your power away, looking for authorities and being told what to do or how you should act and like that. It's coming from within and making choices what feels right for you, getting
Yeah.
back in touch of feeling as opposed to thinking. Instead
And
of thinking solutions, feel them out, whatever's presented in front of you.
And just so you guys know, and thank you, Brian, for sharing. I'm getting a lot of comments here, a lot of really good comments from people listening, um, like how they're enjoying, your sharings and how that really helped to understand. And also here, George is sharing, that it highlights how important it is, to expose some of these stories, and share them, in this sort of safe space here, because a lot of that is nonverbal. And there's a confusion with that because when we go into our pain or our anger, and those are things that are quite typical when you start this kind of work, you all you can do is cry, or throw a tantrum, and of course that feels unacceptable as a grown up, right? But really, what you're doing when you're doing this is you do connect with this part of you, and you help, to get this locked up part back out into the light. Like for me, when I was engaging in my inner child process for the first time, the way I saw, this most hurt inner child. There's actually several inner children in us. So there's several programs that come from our childhood. So when you do inner child work, you may actually encounter different kind of age groups in which certain things happened to you or restricted you. But the way I saw this was like this poor child locked up in the basement, in the dark basement, scared to death, and all it really wants is someone, like a grown up to come and save it, or to come and talk to it, or to be heard, or to be loved, to be held, and to really feel that in you, that helped me to have that compassion, not just for myself, but ultimately also for other people who are stuck in their inner children. Because sometimes you can literally see this in people. And Julian, your comments were really cool about how you discovered your own inner child, right? How you act when you're in your inner child, and then you can even recognize this in the voice that you have. Like you mentioned, that you recognize that you have like a baby voice when you go into your inner child, or people will start literally, I mean, here in the United States we have a wonderful example for an unresolved inner child, as one of our main leaders, without naming anyone, who represents an unhealed inner child in all of his tweets. All right, but to see this with a bit more softness, and to not go into this harsh judgment that we have often experienced through our own parents, because that's exactly where these programs lead us to. They lead us to seeing things the way, like, say, our parents did, or our teachers did, or our siblings did, and not so much how we truly felt them or saw them, because there's too much pain around that. And so, like engaging in this kind of inner work opens up a whole new sort of perspective on things, just like Sebastian shared in the beginning, in relationships, in regards to, friendships, work relationships maybe, or even manifestation, which is kind of like what I had picked for the theme of the day today. Yes, and a lot more comments here. Yes, Cheryl's commenting also, or asking, is there a connection between the karmic need to experience abandonment in order to recognize that we're here by ourselves and thus transcend externalization? Okay, so let me paraphrase this. Cheryl is asking if, when someone has a karmic abandonment issue, okay, like say this, I'm going to use myself as an example for a typical karmic abandonment issue. I was sort of a party child. I was an accident. I wasn't supposed to be there. And of course, my dad did not take responsibility for me. So my mom was all alone and, single mom, a single working mom. And, and of course she projected all, the things in her life that she couldn't do onto me because I basically wrecked her life. And my trauma is, of course, having been held responsible for something obviously that I didn't really choose. But this is an example for just a typical karmic situation. You're born into this situation already. And then, everything that happens is more or less just a consequence of that. And the question that Cheryl is asking, if our karmic purpose really requires us to go through those kind of experiences right off the bat so that we get it, this time around and actually pay attention to these karmic aspects. And my answer from my experience, not just with myself, but as an energy coach and an energy healer, is a clear yes. So the one thing that I notice, just sort of statistically, is that those people with a really strong prompting to go into self-healing, into consciousness development, are typically the ones that are very traumatized from, day one when they were born. So there is, it's kind of like, it either kills you or it makes you stronger. So those of us who got through some of the traumas of our childhood, they are here for a reason. And the reason is that they had to face these adverse circumstances in such an early stage where there was absolutely no way of kidding yourself, no way of, like making this go away, that, you were literally sort of dipped, into your karmic aspect with your nose right there, and you had to deal with it. So part of the self-healing work is to understand that this is more or less like a prompting from your true self into what you need to resolve here into this in this lifetime. Yes, I hope my answer was clear enough. And here's another question coming from Denise. Is there an aspect of inner child that is more typical for females and others more typical for males, or that is related to our feminine or masculine parts? Yes and no. On the energetic level, the genders really dissolve. Our genders transcend, which means that in our energetic makeup, there really isn't any. There isn't a gender. Gender is from an energy work standpoint something just like the country that you were born in, the culture, the ethnic background. The fact that you have blue eyes. Okay, those are outer conditions that predispose you to, like, say, certain social behaviors. But on an energetic level, the processing of these inner child aspects, or other aspects for that matter, such as shadow and karmic stuff, is the same. It's just that sometimes through our social conditioning, the way we approach it or the way it expresses can be different depending on what gender we are. So for, like, as an example, an abandonment issue in a woman can lead to a very submissive and pleasing and codependent behavior, whereas an abandonment issues in men can lead to narcissism. It can also lead to narcissism in women and codependency in men, obviously, but statistically, there's a higher propensity that a man will go out and translate this into performance and competition and overpowering others, whereas just per propensity, a female will more translate this into a dependency kind of situation. And that's, by the way, where I see those staggering statistics of energetically sensitives, empaths, attracting sort of the counter aspect of themselves, namely the narcissist, and that sort of typical toxic relationship pattern between people who are very dependent and people who are very overpowering, very manipulating and controlling. Okay, so there's a link there. And the most typical constellation is that the male will be more the overpowering, or that the shadow aspects of the male will lean more towards the overpowering, where the shadow aspects of the women will more lean towards the codependent and sort of hidden control mechanisms. Hope this helps. So taking back sort of the discussion here, the reason why you see this picture here is it has to do with the collective energies that we're going through. This is a time here at the beginning of January 2018 where we are held to go into these inner child patterns, to go and work with these karmic aspects, and to restructure our life a little bit. When I say collective energies, I'm talking about that these processes will be supported, and if we don't, or if we avoid those processes, then we are very likely, to run into severe resistances or struggles in life. So, and therefore, I've picked a theme of finding your true talent, and finding our true talent is something that is directly linked to manifestation. So here within the Sacred Self-Healing community, we have been working on conscious manifestation and masculine and feminine energies within in the last week or 10 days. And the role of the inner child in our manifestation process is therefore very important to understand. So this is the workshop that we did last week. And there was this one aspect here of the inner child, like how this actually plays into our manifestation process. And when I say manifestation, of course, I mean, like experiencing the reality in which we live, and how this can be affected by unresolved inner child aspects. Yes, and here a picture that I showed in this manifestation workshop, is pretty much us here, and this would be the true us, with our dreams and hopes. And then we have the outer conditions, like the ethnic group, the financial, socioeconomical circumstances, and then we have, of course, all these people in our life, that kind of almost like beat us up on the way there, which leads to us kind of burying that part deeper and deeper, all the way to the point where we find out that we have completely forgotten about it. In fact, we can't connect with this true part in us, like who, or what are we? What are our true goals, our true values, and what are what are our needs, as Ari shared, and also, what are our talents? I mean, what is our purpose, and how does that all tie in? So this is kind of like how we all experience our story, right? We experience our story as something, that is in constant resistance with the environment and other people and inner feelings. And these inner feelings, guilt and fear, and also sort of the constellation of these karmic role players in our life, they lead to us losing that connection and completely separating, and often also fragmenting within. Okay, and that's where the inner child work comes in, because it helps us to develop a strategy how to reunify these fragmented parts of us. And if you remember, the workbook for the step 14 inner child said triune fusion. So fusion as an energy work. So you can probably already feel where this is going. So, fusion means that we have to like mend things that are fragmented, that are split, that are schismatic. Okay. But coming back to like where the issue actually displays or manifests in our lives, I had in that workshop, I had a quote here that for me says it all. And that is in your manifestation process, you manifest what you hold in mind. The only problem is that you're not aware of what it is that you're holding in mind because it's based on an inner fragmentation and separation. And so the quote goes, the only thing standing between you and your goal is the bullshit story you keep telling yourself as to why you can't achieve it. And it may sound a little harsh, but the bullshit story, okay, is the core word here, that we keep telling ourselves. There's another key aspect, namely, well, is it really us telling ourselves that, or is that something like learned behavior or conditioning? Like through this picture here, this is the picture how our conditioning works. But the main aspect or the main point being that it all, more or less derives around what we can't achieve. And so we dismiss all, like our dreams and hopes and our true talents. In fact, we never really, most of us never really had the time or space to actually explore what our true talents are because we were already conditioned when we actually had that opportunity, like say, later teenage years, beginning 20s. And just so you know, there are very clear statistics in the self-healing journey, and that is that most of us get hit with this insight that there's something not right, that we're separated within, and that there are parts that we can't really connect with by the age of 29. Because that's usually when the formation of how we approach life and what we think we can do, when that's formed or when that stops. And now we're finding ourselves in this sort of emptiness and in this place of like just trying to survive life, right? So we're finding ourselves either in sort of a victim type of situation where our life just really struggles, day in, day out with us, or, where we don't feel like we can accomplish anything on our own. So that then leads us when we get into this crisis, this healing crisis, this which often coincides with our spiritual emergence, when we first sort of feel this really strong inner prompting to explore spiritual aspects in our lives. That leads us then to these aspects here, these inner child-related defenses and copings. So this is what you guys shared, basically. There's a process, that has happened in the course of our life that led to a loss of innocence. Definitely. Innocence as in like, just being like completely in awe about everything. If you look at the 2-year-olds that begin to walk and talk, and for them it's all like a huge miracle, and you can tell how their brain starts clicking when they start understanding words, and it's all just like a really big wonder. And that's an innocence that we have at that age that slowly sort of gets deprived because we're now realizing that, we can't say everything that we want to say. We can't do everything that we want to do. We can't explore everything that we want to explore. We may not be able to do this, and we begin to develop fears, that stuck with us for the rest of our lives. So that's the loss of innocence here. Not the loss of innocence, in a Christian or religious sense, but the loss of innocence in regards to we can accomplish anything, right? Because a 2-year-old, even a 2-year-old who has karmic aspects still has that sort of a really clear understanding that, you know, the world derives around him or her, and that sure, he can do anything. Okay, and we lose that. And some of that is healthy and some of it is not. But we're talking about the inner child related aspects that lead to defenses and coping mechanisms, you know, which are more sort of the unhealthy ones. And what it does to us is it closes, you know, us being, you know, open for new experiences and also for new thought processes. And it decreases our willingness to change and our willingness to risk things. It clouds our perception and it gives us a really narrow view on life. So if you actually sort of think back into your own life from when you first, you know, from what you can first remember, you know, it's natural as a child to have these thoughts about your own future and so forth. They're very open and anything is possible. You know, I have a 4-year-old here, you know, who wants to become an ATV driver. You know, that's something he envisions for his future. You know, but as a grown-up, of course, we say, well, ATV driver is not a profession. You can't make money with that. You know, so that's that part of you, you know, is due to the cloud of perception or narrow perception and you know, your closed openness and all that. And then of course comes this whole big subject of coping mechanisms, you know, or the majority of our approaches to life or even activities in life are really just, you know, either based upon avoiding pain or seeking pleasure. And both of these, you know, are the main motivators for coping mechanisms, including addictions. So from an energetic point of view, coping is something, it's almost like a diversion process that the ego comes up with in order to not deal with something, in order to not resolve something. It just wants to get through. It just wants to get by, just wants to survive it. All right. And this could be anything from like someone with an abandonment issue, right? Will maybe try to control you know, like say the relationship partner in order to avoid pain, right? Because if I control this person more, then you know, the person becomes more predictable for me. And you see, you know, I'm trying to phrase this as neutral as possible because it's often, even though it often displays as a shadow aspect, isn't really meant to be shadow, and that's why we can't really see it. You know, all we're doing is trying to avoid pain, right? But the way it feels from the other end is like, hey, you know, you're like controlling, you're overpowering. Or, you know, the same here in regards to seeking pleasure as a means of coping with pain or fear, which then, you know, leads to, you know, distraction mechanisms or hiding or, you know, running away or fighting against things. You know, those can all be linked to seeking pleasure. So these are like some of the main energetic aspects that lead to addictive or behavior or addictive structure in a person. And here within the Sacred Self-Healing course, we regard ego as the main addictive structure that we all have in us. And ego, not in the sense of like egotistical, but it can lead to egotistical behavior, but more in the sense of like what our ego comes up with as coping strategy. And in the deeper journey of consciousness, you find that these are the hardest things to overcome, the hardest things to transcend. But it all really, you know, all of our inner child-related defenses and coping lead to one common thing, and that is the lack of inner connection and the forming of a false self. You know, the false self is kind of like the facade, the front that we put on, you know, in order to get through life. And unfortunately, the problem with the false self is that if we live in that false self for too long, we lose connection with our true self, like Brian said, and then we get to this place when we ask ourselves, what are my true needs? What are my true wants? What are my true talents? And we can't answer it because we honestly don't know. We've spent so much time in trying to be nice, Mr. Nice Guy, or the provider, or Miss Goody Two Shoes, or, you know, the pleasing person or the controlling person that we don't know anymore, what our true wants and needs are. And so this then in our manifestation process leads to inner child related abundance blocks. There are things that we cannot tackle in our lives, and this can be related to money, this can be related to health, this can be related to relationships, but it can also be related to overall happiness in our life. So abundance is not just related to money. Abundance is related to anything in our lives, happiness really, and anything that makes us happy. But if we have lost this inner connection, then we simply don't know anymore what makes us happy, because we are driven by avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. So how would we know what truly makes us happy? And some of these blocks here in energy work that are clearly displayed, and that everybody on their self-healing journey encounters at some point, are inherited karmic family aspects. Is this fragmentation I talked about earlier, and the associated disruptive self-expression. So not really knowing how to express ourselves, basically, who we truly are, who we are. Mental beliefs, performance and expectation issues, and incongruences there. Negative experiences, of course, and the resulting critical inner voice, which is the mouthpiece of our ego, trying to steer us back into what's safe, what's more sort of, what helps to avoid pain or create pleasure more. Yeah. And then, of course, all the unconscious stuff, such as unconscious self-sabotage, shadow, and unconscious coping stuff. And all these are really linked to the lack of inner connections, the true needs and wants. And so here within the sacred self-healing community, we tend to look at our emotions and the way we see the world, the outlook to the world and ourselves as a result of the energetic state that we're in. So we regard everything as vibration, as energy, and that helps to detach a little bit from the the attachments that we can't really that we can't bypass with our ego mind. So if we look at everything as an energy, and if we look at all our different states as energy, we can really see them really as just two different forms of energy. Most people would say negative and positive energies. We stay away from judgments like that. And we call them contractive energies and expansive energies. So everything ego related, is a contractive energy within us that feels negative, that feels sort of downward spiraling, and everything that is an expansive energy within us is something that feels positive, that feels empowering, that feels expansive within us, and also self-propelled. Yes, and George, I see your comment here that you've been discovering a lot of inner fragmentation in the recent transmission work here. Yes, it's a weird place. Yeah, but it's a wonderful opportunity to begin to realize, how you like the ego mind really isn't in control of that, and how this fragmentation is really causing all these frustrations in our lives and these resistances, because we can't really address it with the mind. We have to allow ourselves, to work through the process physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and energetically. And I get to this here in a second. So this is how we look at, the complexity of our inner energetic states, and we divide them into major groups. How I feel like, sort of what my initial coping is, how I see myself and how I see others, and this can help a person to identify, where their energy is located the majority of the time. But I need to rush through this. It can also help a person to decode some of their karmic attachments, just so that you've seen this. And this is a new chart that I came up with, like the different resistances and the different densities that we have to go through when we want to implement new things, like talking about New Year's resolutions, or, tuning into your higher goals. There's certain mechanisms at play that go through all these different layers of our energy system: the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, the etheric, and the energetic. But really all it comes down to, and this is really the core here of step 14, is to understand that when you're dealing with inner child aspects, the outer expression of that is your false self. And so it's really the deep spiritual work of, I don't remember who said it here, if it was Sebastian or Brian, and one of you said this, that it's the process of becoming real. And so the healing process then entails, things that have to do with questioning and self-reflecting. Okay, and sort of the roadmap that we give people is goes kind of like this. First, we teach a person how to reconnect with this inner safe space, and really recondition, restructure your energy to go into that heart center and find, like that empowerment that is so needed as in form of an energetic frequency, really, to help you to empower yourself. And then that allows you to work with some of your core fears, to actually sit in them and to allow them, and to go into this place of compassion that we talked about earlier, where you realize, wow, shoot, man, this is all just about abandonment here. And all I really need is, to love that part of myself. I have to be basically my own parent, and give myself what I needed so much. And that then leads us to realize how much we've externalized in our lives through the mental beliefs that we've taken on, how much we've externalized, like, say, love or attention or validation through others, through money, through props, through whatever, our false self regards as cool, or as safe. And then, of course, we go in this place where we begin to question our false self, and that's something when you've gone through learning how to do these first couple of steps, then that becomes almost like a new MO, and you begin to realize how a lot of your MOs, your approaches to life, like this dog eats dog and performance-based stuff and competition and overpowering and all that is really based on a wrong paradigm, namely the paradigm of the false self. If you can let all that go, all these the pain and the pleasure seeking, then you don't really need that. And then you'll see that you still have a part in you that, regardless of whether you understand that already or not with your mind, it still keeps going, and that's your critical inner voice. And that has to do with expectations and all these conditionings that I showed here earlier, the people with the bats, like beating you down in the course of your life. And that then shows us really how deep those sabotage and coping mechanisms and shadow traits go. So when you enter in this process, then you begin the journey of finding your true talents, because now you can reconnect with your true self. And in the process of reconnecting with your true self, you will find your true talents and your true purpose in life. And what it really is that you then become not only empowered, not only are you able to have access to your higher vibratory skills, you also become able to align yourselves to higher vibratory, to your higher goals, and you begin to rewrite your life story, even the one in the past. Because if you can learn how to heal the pain around your inner child and the fear, then all these things that happened in your childhood, you begin to see them in a different light, and that then leads you to insights like something that Cheryl mentioned here in her question, like, is there a connection between karma and that we have to go through these things, and that these things are basically the purpose of our life? Yes, but you cannot see this for as long as you are attached to the pain and the fear. You can only begin to see this. It all makes sense once you become able to really go into this higher vibratory place here with yourself. Once you can reconnect with your true self, then all that begins to make total sense. And that's then when you understand, your purpose and your goals, and you can actively realign to them. And then the last piece really is finding, your true talents, which are the things, Brian, I think, mentioned this, which are the things that you were born with, the skill set to resolve all these karmic issues that you were born with, that are always there, to reconnect with those. And so I'll give you a tip here on how you can do this, if you've already done some of these other things. If you have not done some of these other steps of the process, then just be patient. You can come here to transCODES. We have energy sessions every other day that deal, with these or related issues, that train your system, how to approach that. But the really understanding higher goals and higher purpose, and also with that, the tools / talents that you have, is something that cannot be done when you are caught in your ego states. In other words, when you are caught in anger, in fear, in pain, or in control, you cannot understand this. So your mind cannot fathom that. And I've tried to express this here with this one sentence. The hardest part about becoming one with the divine field is not to understand it, but to realize that you are already part of it. Like so many of you here confirmed, that these things are always there, always there. And now let me give you a few tips here how you can work through this, because we're already over time. What you see here on the left side, these different color states, they relate to the psychological stages of development, which are important in conjunction with the inner child, to understand when you have certain issues, what age group do they relate to, what part of your life, when you were an infant, or when you were a toddler, or when you were a grade schooler, what part of your development got inhibited or shut down. It helps you in that, you can connect with some of the facts, or some of the facts of your story, but maybe asking your siblings or your parents or whatever, what happened in that time, but what you see here is that those are these stages of your childhood that are related to certain skills and abilities that need to be developed in that time. And when that gets shut down or disrupted, then you can pinpoint that you have issues there. Okay, so someone like myself, or Ade for that matter, with an abandonment issue, which is karmic, okay, and mostly affects sort of the first chakra here, the red zone, leads to issues with trust. And that's why, someone with an abandonment issues has control issues, because what do you do when you can't trust? You feel like you can't trust others, or you can't trust yourself. You focus on self-control, and you focus on controlling others, and controlling environment, and controlling blah, blah, blah. Okay. When someone has had more trauma in the toddler stage, like from 2 to 4, 2 to 5, is it autonomy. So that's when a person constantly feels sort of, subjugated by other people's emotions and guilt tripping. Someone who has, had trauma here in that stage will usually feel guilt and shame all the time, and will not be able to connect with any of the basic needs and wants. Someone with a karmic issue here and trust issue cannot. That's why, Ada, what you said was so cool, because it's exactly what you needed to work on. What do I truly need? So if you have a trust issue, which also reflects a self-trust, you simply don't know what you need. I mean, you just don't know. There's part of your life when that was, supposed to develop, was disrupted. So you can't. And of course, we all have a combination of things. So, someone, who has more like disruptions in toddler stage, will not know what they need or what they want. And someone, where it was more about initiative, where your parents, like say, were overprotective, and they may have had, karmic abandonment issues themselves. So they try to control a lot, what you were doing, and they were shutting you down or telling you that you can't do this, or that this is too dangerous, or that it's against the rules, or whatever. That leads you to not really knowing what you wanted. And then grade school, like elementary school, is when we experiment, is when we explore, when we, find out what works for us and what doesn't, which leads then to the question how we, or the answer to the question how we want things, right? But if you couldn't do this, or this was already inhibited through some of the other things that happened prior, then you don't know how you want things, and so forth. So this is how you can interpret this. And if you have already identified that you have some major issues in some of these areas, and the reason why I put this chakra person there in the background is for you to actually locate it with some of the physical issues that you have, because guess what? These things are not from our inner childhood. They reflect in our physicality. And more often than not, people have chronic issues in exactly those areas that hint at what the issue is, inner child related issue. It's not only inner child, but for most of us, it's the inner child is at the core of stuff. And so the important part here about this healing process is to realize that when you go back and when you enter the healing process step by step, that you can literally change your story. And the way you do this is that you become you become the wise person for yourself. You become the parent for yourself. You become the person who can give you all these things that you need and that you want. And in that, you're basically changing your past. And the main ingredient that is needed for that is really the willingness to go back into, this place with your inner child. And this is the inner child meditation here that comes with step 14, what it trains. And then we have a transmission on top of that where we do this with you. So while you are in that process, we are observing your energy and trying to sustain that safe place for you and trying to help you through the process and discuss it afterwards. So that's kind of like how you have to see how the step meditations facilitate these inner self-healing processes. Yeah, and so this was a lot of talking. So guys, here before we end this live webinar, if you have any questions, please ask now. Raise your hand or type a question. And you can also later visit the forum. All of you who came here today will receive a recording of this webinar, and I will post it in the forum as well so that you can maybe come back and ask questions later or sharings. If you don't have any questions, I just want to thank you for coming here, for spending your time here, and especially those of you who shared so willingly and were vulnerable for all of us here to learn from and to feel, to learn how to feel this. So thank you very much. And if you have questions about the Sacred Self-Healing Program, please email me at Jona@transcodes.com. Or go to the website. It's all explained there, and it's basically a 12-month membership. And when you are part of the Self-Healing Program, you get to do all these webinar meetings for free, the workshops and training sessions that we have, and you get substantial discounts for the ongoing transmissions. It's usually 50%. Yes, so thank you everybody for coming. It's been wonderful. And those of you in the Sacred Self-Healing Program already, I'm going to see you guys soon. It's not in the in the calendar, in the event calendar, but we're going to do a crypto workshop here on January 27th. Yes, beginners, do's and don'ts, how-tos and questions. Yeah, you'll get the invitation. All right, guys. All the best for you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.